Power. That is all Arthur Hastings, the Duke of Strathmore, ever craved when he signed his name on the marriage contract, deliberately condemning an innocent woman to a life devoid of affection. He calculated every risk, orchestrated every betrayal, and manipulated the high society of Regency-era England to secure the vast Wentworth Railway fortune. Yet, he made one fatal miscalculation. He never anticipated that his fragile pawn, Cecilia Wentworth, possessed a mind vastly sharper than his own and a spirit that would completely unravel his ruthless ambition. Welcome to a true tale of historical deception, where a marriage forged in absolute greed becomes a dangerous battlefield of undeniable passion. Arthur Hastings stood before the towering, rain-lashed windows of his ancestral home, the sprawling and dilapidated Strathmore Castle in Northumberland. The heavy velvet drapes, once a rich and vibrant crimson, had faded to the color of dried blood, perfectly mirroring the slow decay of his family's legacy. He was the 9th Duke of Strathmore, a title that commanded immediate respect in the drawing rooms of Mayfair. But respect did not repair crumbling roofs, nor did it pay off the staggering debts his late father had accumulated at the gambling tables of Europe. Arthur needed capital. He needed it desperately, quietly, and immediately. The solution to his impending ruin arrived in the form of a heavily sealed envelope from Lord Richard Wentworth, a newly wealthy industrialist whose iron foundries and railway investments had made him one of the richest men in the country. Richard Wentworth possessed unimaginable wealth, but he lacked the one currency he desperately desired: aristocratic legitimacy. He wanted his family name woven into the ancient tapestry of the British peerage. More specifically, he wanted his niece, Cecilia, to wear a duchess's coronet. The negotiations had been brutally swift and entirely devoid of sentiment. Meeting in the smoke-filled private study of a London gentlemen's club, Arthur and Richard had traded assets like merchants in a bazaar. Arthur would receive an immediate injection of £200,000 into the Strathmore estate, effectively clearing his father's debts and restoring his coal mines. In exchange, Arthur would marry Cecilia, elevate her to the highest ranks of society, and grant Richard the political influence that came with the Strathmore name. "She is a quiet girl," Richard had assured him, taking a long drag from his cigar, the thick smoke masking the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Raised in the country, she knows nothing of business, nothing of politics. She will not interfere with your life, your grace. You need only give her your name and a respectable home. What you do with your private time is entirely your own affair." Arthur had agreed. He viewed the marriage as a mere transaction, a necessary sacrifice to save his bloodline. He had not expected to feel anything for the woman he was essentially purchasing. Their first meeting took place mere days before the wedding at Rosewood Hall, the Wentworths' opulent but soulless country estate in Yorkshire. Arthur had arrived expecting a weeping, tragic figure, or perhaps a grasping social climber eager for a title. Instead, he found Cecilia Wentworth sitting quietly in the conservatory, a book of Greek philosophy resting in her lap. She was striking, though not in the conventional ostentatious manner favored by the ton. She had dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to take the measure of him in a single glance, and a calm, composed demeanor that unnerved him. When Arthur offered a stilted, formal greeting, explaining the practicalities of their upcoming union, Cecilia did not flinch. She simply closed her book, the gold leaf pages snapping shut with a definitive sound. "I understand the arrangement, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady and melodious, lacking any trace of the fear he had expected. "My uncle has purchased a title, and you have purchased your salvation. Let us not pretend it is anything more noble than a mutually beneficial trade." Her bluntness had caught him off guard. He had prepared speeches filled with polite fictions, but she had stripped the veneer away instantly. He nodded, a tight, forced motion. "As long as we understand one another, madam?" The wedding at St. James's Parish was a spectacle of wealth and hollow pageantry. The elite of London society crammed into the pews, their eyes glittering with gossip and thinly veiled judgment. They knew of the Duke's debts. They knew of the Wentworth's new money. It was a merger of desperation and ambition. As Arthur stood at the altar, watching Cecilia walk down the aisle in a gown of heavy, imported ivory silk, he felt nothing but a profound sense of finality. He recited his vows with a cold, mechanical precision. When he placed the heavy gold family band on her slender finger, her skin was cool to the touch. She did not look at him, her gaze fixed firmly on the altar above. As they stepped out of the church and into the waiting carriage, the heavy doors shutting out the cheers of the crowd, a stifling silence descended between them. The contract was sealed. Arthur had his power, his money, and his salvation. He looked across the velvet seats at his new duchess, expecting her to finally break, to weep for the life she had lost. Instead, Cecilia simply turned her head to watch the bustling streets of London roll by, her expression utterly unreadable. Arthur leaned back, convincing himself that this was for the best. She would be his silent duchess, a necessary ghost in his home, while he reclaimed his position in the world. He had no idea that the war for his soul had just begun. The first 3 months of their marriage at Strathmore Castle were characterized by a chilling, polite distance. Arthur threw himself into the restoration of his estate, spending his days riding out to the tenant farms, inspecting the newly reopened coal mines, and poring over architectural plans. He left before dawn and returned long after sunset, intentionally avoiding the sprawling, echoing corridors of the castle to ensure he rarely crossed paths with his wife. He expected Cecilia to fade into the background, to spend her days doing whatever it was that idle aristocratic women did, embroidering, writing letters to acquaintances, or perhaps succumbing to melancholia in the gloomy northern weather. But Cecilia Wentworth was not a woman who allowed herself to be easily dismissed. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the atmosphere within the castle began to change. The loyal, but aging, butler, Mr. Bates, who had served the Hastings family for 40 years, began to speak of the new Duchess with a tone of profound, hushed reverence. The meals, which had been austere and poorly managed for a decade, suddenly transformed into exquisite, perfectly timed affairs. The neglected east wing of the castle, untouched since Arthur's childhood, was thoroughly cleaned and opened up to the sunlight. Arthur noticed these changes but chose to ignore their source until a bitter Tuesday evening in November. Returning late from a grueling day in the freezing rain, Arthur retreated to his private study, a room strictly forbidden to everyone but himself and his most trusted confidant, Edward Fitzroy. Arthur swung the heavy oak door open, expecting the comforting solitude of the crackling fire and his dark mahogany desk. Instead, he froze. There, sitting in his high-backed leather chair, illuminated by the golden glow of a single oil lamp, was Cecilia. Scattered across the vast expanse of the desk were the private ledgers of the Strathmore estate documents detailing the exact nature of his father's debts, the recent influx of the Wentworth capital, and the complex legal clauses of their marriage settlement. Arthur's blood ran instantly cold, followed immediately by a surge of furious heat. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that would have sent any of his servants fleeing in terror. He strode across the room, his wet riding boots leaving dark stains on the Persian rug. "You have no right to be in this room, madam, let alone poring over my private financial affairs." Cecilia did not jump. She did not apologize. She simply placed a slender finger on a specific line in the massive leather-bound ledger, looking up at him with those dark, unyielding eyes. "Your private affairs, Your Grace, are currently entirely funded by my dowry," she stated calmly, her voice cutting through his anger like a perfectly sharpened blade. "And it appears you are remarkably naive when it comes to the legal machinations of my uncle." Arthur stopped at the edge of the desk, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "I had lawyers review the settlement, Cecilia. The funds are secure. The debt is paid. Step away from the desk." Your lawyers, Cecilia replied, standing up slowly, matching his intense glare with a terrifying stillness of her own, were fools. Or perhaps they were bought. Look at this clause here, buried in the addendum regarding the Northern Railway expansion. She pushed the heavy document toward him. My uncle did not just give you £200,000, Arthur. He secured a lien against the Strathmore coal mines in the event that you failed to produce an heir within 3 years. Furthermore, the money he provided was not a direct transfer. It was a loan from his own private bank, with an interest rate cleverly disguised as operational costs. If you miss a single quarterly payment, which he has structured to be virtually impossible during the winter months, he can seize the title to this castle. Arthur stared at the complex legal jargon she was pointing to. The words blurred together as the horrifying reality of her statement washed over him. He had been so desperate to save his family name that he had walked blindly into a trap. Richard Wentworth hadn't just bought a title. He had engineered a situation where he would eventually own the entire Strathmore legacy. "Why are you telling me this?" Arthur asked, his voice suddenly hollow, the fight draining out of him. He looked at his wife, truly looking at her for the first time since their wedding day. "He is your blood. This was his plan to enrich your family at the expense of mine. Why expose him?" Cecilia stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. In the dim light of the study, she looked ethereal, yet grounded by a fierce, undeniable strength. "Because, Arthur, I am not my uncle's pawn, and I refuse to be yours. I was sold to you like a prize mare. Richard assumed I would sit quietly and knit while he dismantled your life, but he forgot that I spent 10 years managing his accounts when his own clerks could not." She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing the sleeve of his damp coat. The brief contact sent an unexpected shockwave through his chest. "I do not care for my uncle's greed," she continued, her voice softening just a fraction. "And while I may not have chosen this marriage, I will not allow the home that is now mine to be stolen by deceit. We are tied together now, for better or worse. If you fall, I fall, and I have no intention of falling." Arthur stood paralyzed, a chaotic storm of emotions warring within him. He had married her for power, intending to use her and ignore her. Yet here she stood, brilliant, defiant, and entirely formidable, holding the key to his true salvation. As he looked into her eyes, the cold, calculated foundation of his world began to crack. The ghost he had tried to lock away in the East Wing was not a ghost at all. She was a queen, and for the very first time, the Duke of Strathmore felt the dangerous, intoxicating spark of genuine respect and something far more terrifying igniting in his cold heart. The arrival of the spring season forced Arthur and Cecilia to leave the rugged isolation of Northumberland and return to the glittering, venomous snake pit of London high society. They took up residence in the grand Strathmore townhouse on Grosvenor Square, instantly becoming the prime target for every gossiping lord and whispering lady in the city. Society waited with bated breath to see the cracks in their arranged union, expecting the Duke to treat his new, merchant-class bride with cold disdain. Instead, society was met with a united, impenetrable front. The shift in Arthur was profound, though he fought bitterly to conceal it. Since the night in the study, his perception of Cecilia had fundamentally altered. He found himself seeking her out, lingering in the morning room just to hear her sharp, witty critiques of the daily newspapers, or watching her with an intense, burning fascination as she effortlessly navigated the complex social hierarchies of their dinner parties. She was brilliant, commanding the attention of dukes and diplomats alike, not with flirtation, but with a sharp intellect that left the old guard of the ton entirely outmaneuvered. But with this new admiration came a dark, consuming possessiveness that Arthur had never experienced. The breaking point occurred at the spectacular mid-season masquerade ball hosted by the Duke of Devonshire. The grand ballroom was a sea of swirling silk, candlelight, and the heavy scent of beeswax and crushed roses. Arthur, unmasked but observing from the shadows of a marble pillar, watched as Cecilia was approached by Lord Henry Spencer. Henry Spencer was a man of notorious reputation, wealthy, handsome, and utterly devoid of morals. He was also a man who had once sought an alliance with Richard Wentworth, hoping to claim Cecilia and the railway fortune for himself before Arthur had secured the contract. Through the crowded dance floor, Arthur watched Henry lean entirely too close to Cecilia, his aristocratic face arranged in a predatory smirk. Arthur could not hear the words being exchanged, but he saw the way Henry's hand lingered on Cecilia's waist, and the way he leaned in to whisper intimately in her ear. A sudden, violent wave of jealousy crashed over Arthur, so intense it physically stole his breath. He didn't care about the Wentworth fortune in that moment. He didn't care about the coal mines or the estate. He only knew that another man was touching his wife, threatening the brilliant, infuriating woman who had forcefully claimed a place in his mind. Arthur cut through the crowd with the ruthless efficiency of a predator, his dark eyes locked on Spencer. He reached them just as Henry was saying, "Surely, my dear Duchess, you must realize he only tolerates you for the ledger balances. A man like Strathmore does not love, he only acquires." Lord Spencer. Arthur's voice sliced through the music, cold and lethal. He stepped between them, smoothly but firmly extracting Cecilia from Henry's proximity. "I believe the Duchess has promised this waltz to me. And as for my acquisitions, I suggest you concern yourself with your own dwindling estates before you presume to understand the affairs of mine." Henry's face flushed with anger, but the pure, unadulterated danger in Arthur's eyes forced him to step back and offer a stiff bow before retreating into the crowd. Arthur turned to Cecilia, his chest heaving slightly, his heart hammering against his ribs. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide, searching his face. Without a word, he took her arm and led her off the dance floor, past the staring crowds, out the grand double doors, and into the cool, crisp night air of the waiting carriage. As the carriage lurched forward, rattling over the cobblestones toward Grosvenor Square, the silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words. "You did not need to intervene," Cecilia said quietly, staring out the window at the passing gas lamps. "I was perfectly capable of handling Lord Spencer. He was merely attempting to sow discord by revealing my uncle's secondary plans." "I am aware of what he was doing," Arthur snapped, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He ran a hand through his hair, dropping the mask of the cold, calculating Duke, "And I do not care. I will not have him, or any man, speak to you in such a manner." Cecilia turned to him, a faint, sad smile playing on her lips. "Why, Arthur? Because it damages your pride? Because it reminds you of the transactional nature of our vows? Because it is a lie!" Arthur suddenly shouted, the confession tearing out of his throat before he could stop it. The carriage seemed to shrink around them. He leaned forward, closing the space between them, his voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper. "Spencer said I only tolerate you for the ledger balances, that I do not love, that I only acquire. It is a lie, Cecilia." She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "I married you for power," Arthur confessed. His eyes locked onto hers, stripping away every defense he had spent a lifetime building. "I meant to use you to save my name, and I meant to leave you in the shadows, but you refused to stay there. You saved my estate from your uncle's trap. You matched my intellect, you challenged my pride, and you forced me to see you. I do not look at the ledgers anymore, Cecilia. I only look for you. I am completely, irrevocably at your mercy." Cecilia stared at the man she had married, the man known for his cold, impenetrable heart, now laid entirely bare before her. The twist of fate was absolute. The Duke who had orchestrated the ultimate deception had deceived no one but himself. She reached out, her trembling fingers gently cupping his face. "If you are at my mercy, Arthur," she whispered, the walls around her own heart finally shattering, "then you must know. I paid off my uncle's lien 3 weeks ago, using my own private inheritance. The debt is gone. The contract is broken. I am not tied to you by obligation anymore." Arthur's eyes widened in shock. "You paid it? You freed me? Why?" Cecilia leaned in, her lips inches from his, the power dynamic of their marriage completely and forever rewritten. "Because, you foolish Duke," she breathed, "I decided I wanted to keep you." The transition from a marriage of cold convenience to one of undeniable, consuming passion did not happen slowly. It ignited that very night, walking past the bewildered Mr. Bates in the grand foyer. Arthur did not release Cecilia's hand. He led her past the formal drawing rooms, past the grand staircase, and directly into the private sanctuary of his study. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, isolating them from the prying eyes of the servants and the gossiping world outside, the Duke of Strathmore abandoned every ounce of his legendary restraint. He pressed Cecilia against the mahogany panels of the door, his mouth crashing down upon hers with a desperate, starving intensity. There was no hesitation in her response. Her hands tangled in his thick dark hair, pulling him closer, returning his kiss with a fierce, demanding fire that mirrored his own. For Arthur, it was as if he had been stumbling through a frozen wasteland his entire life, only to suddenly step into the blinding heat of the sun. She was brilliant. She was ruthless. And she was entirely his. "You are a terrifying woman, Cecilia," Arthur murmured against her lips, his breath ragged as he traced the delicate line of her jaw. "To secretly dismantle your uncle's empire and buy my freedom. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "I secured my investment, Your Grace," she whispered back, though the teasing spark in her dark eyes was softened by overwhelming affection. "I refuse to be a temporary fixture in your life. If we are to build a legacy, it will be built on equal ground, free from the venom of Richard Wentworth." Their days transformed. The gloomy, echoing townhouse suddenly felt alive, filled with the warmth of shared laughter over breakfast and the quiet intimacy of late-night strategizing in the study. Society quickly realized that the Duke and Duchess of Strathmore were no longer a disjointed pair of aristocrat and merchant. They were a formidable, impenetrable fortress. However, a fortress is only truly tested when it is under siege. Across the city, in the opulent but smoke-stained reading room of Boodle's, one of the most exclusive gentlemen's clubs in the capital, Richard Wentworth was nursing a glass of expensive brandy and an explosive, unholy rage. He had just received a frantic dispatch from his chief clerk, Mr. Finch. The lien against the Strathmore coal mines, the very mechanism Wentworth had designed to legally steal the Duke's ancestral lands, had been paid in full. The funds had been transferred through an anonymous draft via the Bank of England, but Wentworth was no fool. He knew exactly who possessed that kind of liquid capital, and the brilliant, calculating mind to execute the transfer without his immediate knowledge. His own niece. "She betrayed me," Wentworth snarled, slamming his fist onto the small wooden table, causing his brandy to spill over the crystal rim. "I elevated her from nothing. I bought her a coronet, and she uses my own family's wealth to cut my throat." "Family loyalty is such a fragile commodity, is it not?" A smooth, oily voice drawled from the shadows of a high-backed leather chair. Wentworth looked up, his eyes narrowing as Lord Henry Spencer stepped into the dim light. Spencer's handsome face was marred by a vindictive sneer. He had not forgotten the public humiliation he suffered at the hands of the Duke during the Devonshire ball. His pride demanded blood, and his dwindling bank accounts demanded the Wentworth fortune. "What do you want, Spencer?" Wentworth growled, wiping the spilled liquor from his knuckles with a silk handkerchief. "I am not in the mood for the idle chatter of bankrupt lords." Spencer chuckled, taking a seat opposite the furious industrialist. "I am not here for idle chatter, Richard. I am here to offer you a key to the castle you so desperately wish to conquer. You underestimated your niece, and you underestimated the Duke's ability to charm her into submission. But I know a secret about the Hastings family that not even the brilliant Duchess is aware of." Wentworth paused, his predatory instincts suddenly sharpening. "Speak." Leaning forward, Spencer lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Before Arthur's father died, he did not just accumulate debts at the English card tables. He was a desperate man. In his final months, he borrowed an astronomical sum from a French syndicate operating out of Calais, a syndicate known for breaking bones and seizing assets without the polite formalities of the English courts. The debt is entirely separate from the estate ledgers you reviewed. It was a private promissory note, signed with the Strathmore seal. And, as luck would have it, I recently purchased that note for a fraction of its cost from a French associate. A slow, chilling smile spread across Wentworth's face. And since the debt predates the marriage settlement. Exactly, Spencer confirmed, his eyes gleaming with malice. Arthur is liable. The sum is large enough to bankrupt him thrice over. If we call in the debt immediately, the Duke will be ruined. He will be sent to Fleet Prison for insolvency. The scandal will be absolute. You can petition the courts to annul the marriage based on financial fraud, reclaim your niece and her inheritance. And I will gladly step in to offer the disgraced Duchess a respectable, quiet life away from society. It was a masterstroke of villainy, a perfectly engineered plot to destroy the Duke, humiliate the Duchess, and divide the spoils between two men, driven by absolute greed. They shook hands in the dim light of the club, unaware that the game they were playing was against a woman who saw 3 moves ahead of every man in the city. The trap was set to spring on the most public, glittering stage imaginable. The grand summer gala at the Royal Pavilion in Brighton. The Prince Regent himself was hosting the event, ensuring that every person of consequence, power, and influence in the realm would be in attendance. The pavilion, with its absurd, lavish domes and Indian-inspired architecture, was packed with the elite, dripping in diamonds and suffocating in the heavy summer heat. Arthur and Cecilia arrived looking every inch the victorious, deeply in love couple. Cecilia wore a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to capture the starlight, a stunning sapphire necklace, a Hastings family heirloom retrieved from the vaults resting against her collarbone. Arthur never strayed far from her side, his hand resting securely on the small of her back, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with a fierce, protective pride. It was shortly after midnight, as the orchestra struck up a lively country dance, that the shadows moved to strike. Arthur and Cecilia had retreated to one of the pavilion's ornate, private withdrawing rooms to escape the stifling heat of the ballroom. They were sharing a quiet, intimate moment, Arthur whispering a thoroughly improper suggestion into Cecilia's ear that made her flush beautifully when the double doors were suddenly thrown open. Richard Wentworth marched into the room, his face set in a mask of aggressive triumph. Closely behind him trailed Lord Henry Spencer, looking like a cat that had finally cornered a desperately injured bird. Arthur immediately stepped in front of Cecilia, his posture instantly shifting from relaxed lover to lethal predator. "You forget your manners, Wentworth," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "This is a private room. Leave before I have the royal guards throw you out into the sea." "I think not, Your Grace," Wentworth sneered, pulling a heavily folded document from his coat pocket. "In fact, I believe you will find that you are the one who is about to be thrown out. Out of this pavilion, out of your castle, and out of civilized society." Spencer stepped forward, unfurling a second, older piece of parchment. It bore the unmistakable, heavy red wax seal of the previous Duke of Strathmore. "We have come to collect, Arthur," Spencer said, practically purring with satisfaction. "A rather massive, overlooked debt from your late father, payable immediately upon presentation, to me." Arthur stared at the document. He recognized his father's erratic, desperate handwriting. The sum listed at the bottom was staggering, over £300,000. A cold, suffocating dread washed over him. The estate was solvent now, yes, but it did not have that kind of liquid capital just sitting in the vaults. If Spencer called it in, the courts would seize the coal mines, the castle, everything he and Cecilia had worked to protect. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had failed. He had thought he was safe, but the ghosts of his father's sins had finally caught up to him. He turned slightly to look at Cecilia, his heart breaking. "Cecilia, he started, his voice thick with defeat. "I didn't know." Wentworth barked a harsh laugh. "Of course he didn't know. He is a fool playing at business. Now, the game is over. Arthur, you are ruined. Cecilia, you will leave this bankrupt charlatan tonight. I have already drafted the annulment papers. We leave for Yorkshire in the morning." Arthur braced himself to fight, to tear Spencer apart with his bare hands if necessary. But before he could move, a soft, distinctly musical laugh echoed through the tense room. Arthur, Wentworth, and Spencer all froze, turning to look at the Duchess. Cecilia stepped out from behind Arthur. She did not look frightened. She did not look defeated. She looked entirely, terrifyingly amused. She slowly smoothed the skirts of her blue silk gown, stepping right up to Lord Spencer, her dark eyes flashing with brilliant, lethal intelligence. "My dear Lord Spencer," Cecilia said, her voice perfectly calm, ringing clearly in the quiet room. "You really are a remarkably predictable creature. Did you truly believe that I would clear my husband's estate of my uncle's treacherous liens, only to leave the back door completely unlocked?" Spencer's smug smile faltered slightly. "The debt is legal, Duchess. Your clever words will not save him." "Oh, the debt is certainly legal," Cecilia agreed, pacing slowly around the two men like a judge evaluating the condemned. "But your ownership of it is entirely obsolete. You see, when I discovered my uncle's plot months ago, I did not merely hire clerks to review the Strathmore ledgers. I hired Pinkerton agents to review the lives of the men threatening my husband. I knew of the French syndicate. I knew they were looking to offload the debt." She stopped beside Arthur, taking his hand and lacing her fingers through his. The warmth of her touch sent a shock of hope straight into Arthur's chest. "What are you saying?" Wentworth demanded, his face beginning to pale. "I am saying," Cecilia continued, her gaze locking onto Spencer, "that you did not purchase this debt directly from the French, Lord Spencer. You purchased it through a broker in London, a broker who was secretly acting on behalf of Alexander Baring of the Baring Brothers Bank, and Mr. Baring was acting on strict instructions from me." Spencer physically stumbled backward, the parchment trembling in his hand. "No, that is impossible. The proxy was mine," Cecilia stated, her voice hardening into steel. "I own the debt, Lord Spencer. You paid £70,000 to acquire it, funneling the money directly into my private accounts, and the document you hold is merely a copy of the transfer, not the deed of ownership. Furthermore, to raise that £70,000, you heavily mortgaged your own estates in Cornwall." She took a step closer to the ruined lord, delivering the final fatal blow. "And since I am the primary shareholder of the Baring Consortium that underwrote your mortgage, I am now calling in your debt. Payable immediately. You are bankrupt, Lord Spencer. Your lands belong to me. You have until the end of the month to vacate your ancestral home before I sell it for scrap." The silence in the room was absolute deafening. Spencer's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The aristocratic arrogance was entirely stripped away, leaving only a broken, utterly destroyed man. Cecilia then turned her terrifying gaze to her uncle. Wentworth physically shrank under her stare. "As for you, uncle," she said softly, but the underlying threat was immense. "You tried to sell me. You tried to ruin the man I love. You will return to Yorkshire tonight. You will never set foot in London again, and you will never attempt to contact me or my husband. If I ever hear your name whispered in Mayfair, I will use my newly acquired financial leverage to crush your railway expansion before a single mile of track is laid. Do we understand one another?" Wentworth, pale and trembling, could only offer a jerky, defeated nod. He turned and fled the room, dragging the catatonic Lord Spencer behind him. As the doors clicked shut, the heavy, oppressive tension evaporated, leaving only the faint sound of the orchestra playing in the distance. Arthur stood entirely motionless, staring at his wife. His mind was struggling to process the sheer magnitude of her brilliance. She had not just defended him, she had systematically annihilated their enemies, securing their future, their wealth, and their legacy in a single, flawless maneuver. Cecilia turned back to him, the fierce, terrifying Duchess fading away, replaced by the woman who had captured his soul. A small, almost shy smile touched her lips. "I hope I did not overstep, Your Grace. I know how you prefer to handle the estate matters yourself." Arthur let out a ragged breath that was half laugh, half sob. He closed the distance between them, wrapping his arms around her waist and lifting her right off her feet. He spun her around, burying his face in the fragrant silk of her shoulder. "You magnificent, brilliant, dangerous creature," Arthur whispered fervently, setting her down but refusing to let her go. He framed her face with his hands, looking deep into her dark, beautiful eyes. "I married you for power, Cecilia. I thought I knew what power was. I was a fool." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "You are my power. You are my heart. You are the only thing in this world that truly matters." Cecilia reached up, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him down into a kiss that sealed their victory and their vows forever. They returned to the ballroom not as a duke and his merchant bride, but as the undisputed rulers of Mayfair. They had faced the shadows of deceit, greed, and betrayal, and they had emerged entirely victorious. Arthur Hastings had set out to use a woman to save his castle, but in the end, it was the woman who saved the man, proving that the most unbreakable empires are never forged by contracts, but by the relentless, unyielding power of true love. What an absolutely breathtaking conclusion. Cecilia Wentworth did not just flip the script. She completely rewrote the rules of high society, proving that a brilliant mind is the most dangerous weapon of all. Lord Spencer and Richard Wentworth thought they were playing a game of checkers, while our incredible Duchess was 5 moves ahead in a high-stakes game of chess. From a marriage of cold, calculated power to a legendary romance that conquered the glittering ballrooms of the Regency era, Arthur and Cecilia's story is a testament to the fact that true love can conquer the darkest of betrayals. If this dramatic tale of historical revenge, fierce loyalty, and unexpected passion kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Share this video with a friend who loves a strong, mastermind female lead who saves the day. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling dive into the scandalous, secret histories of romance and royalty. Until next time, keep reading and stay dramatic.